Hey everyone, this is a great article from Barbara Kay, contributing to the National Post, January 31st, 2017. Headline: Fascism in America? Sure, but not because of you know who. And we know who the you know who is: Donald Trump, right? Well, let's read on and listen to what Barbara's got to say. And thank goodness there are people like this that are willing in the establishment media in Canada. Very, very few, but I'll recognize, and I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to try to continually keep their names front and center so that I can point out, because they need to be commended for standing up and at least being somewhat objective in the reporting. NDP leader Thomas Mulcair says Trump is a fascist, and so do countless others. Fair comment? No, it's fair to say that all fascists are populists, but not all populists are fascists. When leftists say fascist, it often means right-wing people or opinions that offend me. In fact, fascism can arise on the left or the right. I've seen several tweets linking Trump with the protagonist of Sinclair Lewis's 1935 novel, It Can't Happen Here. The story of an Illinois senator who parlays extreme nativism to the White House, but they fail to mention the novel's protagonist. Was a socialist. What exactly does fascism mean? In his best-selling 2007 book, Liberal Fascism, with an afterword on Obama in the 2009 election, conservative pundit Jonah Goldberg offers this working definition. Fascism is a religion of the state. Yeah. That is something that, yes, very, very ideologically dogmatic beliefs. Yes, it is. Well, the state is a religion, and fascism, the belief in the state and using state powers, of course, it's a religion of the state. It assumes the organic unity of the body politic and longs for a national leader attuned to the will of the people. Right? It is totalitarian in that it views everything as political and that any action by the state is justified to achieve the common good. Right? We all know fascism, and I've go through my past videos. I've covered this topic extensively in multiple videos, whether it's communism, socialism, fascism, democracy. They're all forms of collectivism, where you sacrifice the individual for the greater good. The American Republican experience, or the American Republic, the establishment of the American government, which is still, and like I say, they still left some mystical concepts entrenched in their belief, but the one profound difference, and this is something that everyone needs to look at. Take your political biases and all your bullshit that you've heard from other people in the past and just think of these two things. Whatever country or whatever ideology that you're referring to, think about it. The number one thing that you should recognize is, if you really care about rights and freedoms and liberty for all, is one, when you're talking about right versus left, or all this bullshit, Republican, conservative, there's many, many, many different myriads and iterations of collectivism. But think about what the one distinctive difference is about the universal, which is the American political system, the Republican political system they established back when they set up, the Founding Fathers, right? Which were predominantly limited government libertarians. That's what they were back in the day. They were trying to get rid of the old world mysticism and the mythology of, having central authorities called kings and queens. But yes, statism is a religion, and all collective ideologies share that very same fundamental principle, which is sacrificing the individual for the greater good. That, if you're an individual, which every one of us are, except for what? Conjoined twins and a few very, very, very rare exceptions. But once again, are these people being oppressed? Are people really going against conjoined twins? Right? No, of course not. They're not people that need to have the concern of what we're talking and discussing now. So when you're talking about any ideology, right? And that's the thing that why I would consider myself, why when I look out on the landscape and I see all the many different isms and ideologies, the only one thing that I want to adhere to as a moral and ethical and objective person is the philosophy which is espoused that respects and promotes the individual. Because every single one of us, whether take politics, take religion, take race, take sex, take all that out of the equation, every one of us, the greatest minority on the planet is the individual. Every one of us are the individual. So if you respect the individual and the rights of the individual, then that will play out perfectly for everybody because we're all individuals. The minute there's an exception to the rule, where you bring in collectivism, where you can now sacrifice the individual for the greater good, right? Under the political means, it's just a perfect opportunity. It's a perfect trap set to allow authoritarianism, totalitarianism, and the rise of these ridiculously oppressive states. That's where it all comes from. Let me get back to reading this article. It is totalitarian in that it views everybody as political and that any action by the state is justified to achieve the common good. It takes responsibility for all aspects of life, including our health and well-being, and seeks to impose uniformity of thought and action, whether by force or by regulation and social pressure. Everything, including the economy and religion, must be aligned with its objectives. Any rival identity is part of the problem and therefore defined as the enemy. So that's cultural Marxism. Progressivism, leftism is dominant in that ideology, right? Sounds about right for Mussolini, but also for conservatives shunning American campuses and the velvet totalitarianism of their gender relations and speech codes. So, right? Progressivism, cultural Marxism is what she's talking about. Fascism, according to Goldberg, can present as heavy or light depending on cultural governance. Fascism, according to Goldberg, can present as heavy or light depending on cultural governance. Under Hitler, Germany produced a warmongering, racially hygienic fascism. Mussolini, an avowed socialist his entire life and without expansionist ambition, bore no special animus towards Jews. In America, influential progressives shared with fascists the burning desire to transcend clash and later racial differences within the national community by creating a new order, always couched in ringing tropes of hope, change, and a unifying war against poverty, racism, climate change, etc., and drugs, right? This, Goldberg argues, is nice fascism, symbolized by the book's cover image of a smiley face emoji sporting a familiar little mustache. And we know all about this. Fascists come in very varied shapes, sizes, and styles, right? And that nice fascism is the worst kind. The brutal authoritarian type of fascism you can see come from a mile away. But the nice fascists are the ones that, they'll shank you in the back the minute you turn away from them, right? That's the kind that you really got to worry yourself with because you don't know who they are. They're very deceptive, very devious in their approach. Goldberg traces the totalitarian temptation of the progressives through the entire 20th century, demolishing the received wisdom that McCarthyism and Charles Lindbergh are American history's most notable fascist moments. His chapter on progressive nonpareil Woodrow Wilson, who admired Mussolini, for example, is illuminating. Under Wilson, more dissidents were arrested or jailed in a few years than under Mussolini during the entire 1920s. In making the controversial case that Wilson was the 20th century's first fascist dictator, Goldman builds his case with brick upon brick of facts and self-condemning words. Wilson was America's first academic in the White House. He swept the Electoral College with 42% of the popular vote. A devotee of science and the cult of expertise, he thought society could be engineered accordingly to a eugenics theory rooted in social Darwinism, which permitted Wilson to conclude without guilt that giving the vote to blacks was the foundation of every evil in this country. Wilson also had an autocratic bent, subscribing to the big man theory of governance. He believed a true leader uses the masses like tools, stirring up passions and deliberately not appealing to their reason, on the grounds that citizens are much readier to receive a half-truth which they can promptly understand than a whole truth which has too many sides to be seen all at once. So true. Wilson introduces the Sedition Act to suppress criticism of America's war, which banned writing, printing, or publishing any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the United States government or the military. So much for free speech. Postal privileges could be revoked. Over 400 publications were denied privilege by May 1918. One man was brought to trial for explaining to his own home why he didn't want to buy Liberty bonds. Goldberg estimated that some 175,000 Americans were arrested for failing to demonstrate their patriotism in one way or another. McCarthy's overreach pales insignificantly in comparison. So you see, it can and did happen in the U.S., and it happened on the watch of a former president of Princeton University, a leftist intellectual, an idealist, and, as is all too often the case with progressives, an evolutionary utopian quite willing to break a few democratic eggs to make his transformative omelet, right? Central planners. It is fair comment to observe that Trump is a thin-skinned bully and temperamentally unfit to govern. Fair comment that he is a populist and a nativist. But he is not seeking to rescind constitutional freedoms. His war with the media is conducted in the open, on a level playing field. He shows no urge to suppress the speech of his enemies. He twists economic arms, but he doesn't break them. He mocks marches against him, but doesn't ban them. He seeks less statism, not more, in health insurance and education. He is anti-abortion, but has no plans to ban it. Defunding is not banning. He has no concept of a state religion other than ensuring economic and military hegemony for defensive purposes, and he has no wish to impose American values elsewhere. He has said he will defer to his cabinet secretaries when they disagree. He has also so far done nothing illegal. He is no fascist, and Montclair should retract his statement. And like I say, this is from Barbara Kay from the National Post. Very astute, very profound, and very in-depth article regarding the very concept, the very definition of the term fascism and what it means. Now, you can look at someone like Trump, and based on all the descriptions, it may very well seem like he is closely aligned or fit in that description. But then you also have to take your remove the political ideology, whether it's right or left, out of your brain, and then think about who in the past didn't appeal to those kinds of things. Who in the past did not present very fascist, collectivist premises and principles that they espoused to gain power, to gain populism, to gain control over the minds of the masses. Obama, Bush. Why do you think, when you look at all those pictures back in the day, and I always questioned this many times before I started getting into this, is how in the fuck did Hitler or Mussolini, how did they have so many people behind them? Because the words that they espouse hit home to a lot of people. All right? That ultimately, it's when big government has divided the population to the point where they're just, someone's looking to use the gun in the room, right? The power of government. And they just said, fuck it, we're done. Not even going to pretend to just barely wave it around. Now we're going to literally be pointing at everyone. That is the rise of fascism. And it has already happened, not just in the U.S., but in a lot of Western countries. But yeah, it was that more soft fascism. Not the full-on totalitarianism, because people would have automatically recognized that. They had to reinvent and tweak their approach. But make no mistake, and I've said this in a video that I did almost a year ago, if Trump's a fascist, by the definition of the kind of things or words he says or acts that he's done, then that means that every politician that is occupied, the Oval Office in the U.S. or in Canada, in Ottawa, or in the U.S. or in the U.K. on Downing Street, they're all a fascist of some form, a collectivist at least, tweaking, around the edges of what kind of authoritarianism or totalitarianism that actually comes as a result of the individual that's in the position of power of influence at the top. Yeah, that can be tweaked somewhat, slightly. But it's the whole premise of the state being the ultimate arbiter and opinion that is representative of supposedly the minds of the masses, of the countless millions of people in each country. That is the premise. That's where that dogmatic belief is the most destructive aspect of central planning and governance. Not the particular person at the top, even though that can have, because of their charisma and their ability to put forth the sales narrative, right? Their pitch. Of course, some are going to be more successful than others. But it's not about the person, once again. It's about the platform, the implementation, the institution that they use to bring about their authority on the masses. So go ahead. You can be against Trump. But if you're against Trump now, then that means you had to at least been against every other former demagogue or central planning control freak or sociopath, right? If you hadn't, and we're seeing now that we're seeing, the left, totally on board with authoritarianism, bombing foreign countries, all this crazy shit. When it was done under Obama, liberals were all, or leftists or progressives, all these collectivist fucks were all hiding under their beds. Well, not really hiding, but staying low-key and quiet and silent while it was going on, because it was their political masters that was carrying out these evil acts and deeds. But when it's someone that they see that's not on their team doing it, you see how this plays out? This is why, and this is the part, let me finish this video up real quick by saying, this whole Donald Trump experience and the Brexit thing, and hopefully it'll come to Canada soon at some point in time in the future, hopefully in the next election season. But this is it's shining a big spotlight on the fact that, the stuff that people like myself that have been railing against, big government, leftists are finally now, it took Donald Trump, that's the fucking crazy part is, it took Donald Trump coming to power now for all these progressives, these leftists, these collectivists to finally start to stand up and rail against big government. It's a good thing, no matter how you look at it. So, while I may not be the staunchest supporter of Trump, once again, it's proven to be quite beneficial in this current age, in this current time, whether you like it or not. Because it's shining a light on everybody. That's now, like I said, the mirror's being held up. Now everyone's going to have to look back at all of the bullshit they promoted and espoused beforehand, or that they're espousing now, and look at how their minds and opinions change depending on which team's in power. This is very profound. This is very important. And this is something that's going to play on the minds and the psyches of the people for a long time. It's a good thing, people. It's still not great, but it's not the worst thing ever. Skinny Libertarian, and I love liberty.